Her father left her to die in a dark forest, but what happens next will shock you. She returns not as a victim, but as a fierce queen leading an unstoppable army. You won't believe her revenge. The wind was still that morning in Quaronda. Not a single bird chirped. The sun had barely risen when Chief Bakaru moved silently through the dry Golani wilderness, his heavy steps muffled by the thick leaves below. On his back, he carried his little daughter, Naria, just 7 years old, still fast asleep, clutching her handmade clay doll tightly. Her face was peaceful. She had no idea what was coming. Bakaru's face was tense. His eyes were full of fear, not for his daughter, but for the prophecy he had heard the night before. The oracle's words echoed in his mind like a curse. Your daughter will return with fire in her eyes and take your throne by storm. Those words had shaken him more than any enemy. To Bakaru, nothing was more important than power. He had fought battles, betrayed allies, even banished his own brother to keep the crown. But now, it was his own daughter he feared. He stopped at the base of an old tree, deep in the wilderness, where wild animals roamed and no human dared to live. Slowly, he knelt and placed Naria gently on the dry ground. Her small hand still held onto the doll, as if it gave her strength. He stared at her for a long moment, torn between love and fear. Then he whispered, "Forgive me," even though he knew she never would. Without another word, Bakaru turned and disappeared into the forest shadows, leaving no trace. Hours passed. The hot sun climbed high. Naria stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confused. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked around. There was no one. The doll was still in her hand, but her father was gone. She called out, "Papa!" No answer. She stood, panicked, turning in circles. Her little legs ran through the trees, calling his name again and again. Still, nothing. Only the sharp cry of a jackal nearby. The wilderness was cruel. The sun burned her skin. Her throat dried. Her belly cried for food. Thorns scratched her legs. She screamed, cried, begged, but no one came. Not even a bird flew by. It was just her clay doll, and the unforgiving forest. By nightfall, she curled up beneath the same tree, shivering from fear and cold. Every snap of a twig made her jump. She hugged the doll to her chest like a shield. Tears soaked her cheeks as she whispered, "Why, Papa?" over and over again. But there was no answer, only silence. What Chief Bakaru didn't know was that the fire the oracle spoke of had just been lit, and that little girl he left behind, broken and betrayed, wouldn't stay silent forever. She would rise from the same ground he abandoned her on, and one day return with more than just fire in her eyes. She would return with an army, and the throne he tried to protect would be the very thing she would crush. 3 days had passed. Naria's lips were cracked, her small body weak, and her clay doll now just a broken lump in her hand. The sun burned fiercely. Her cries had stopped. She had no more tears, no food, no water, just the will to stay alive. Every breath was a fight. Every minute was pain. She was only a child, but something inside her refused to let go. Then, movement. She couldn't lift her head, but she heard footsteps. Shadows fell over her body. Warriors. Not ordinary men. These were the exiles of Zamora, a fallen kingdom known for its brutal warriors and scorched history. Outcasts. Survivors. Some called them ghosts of war. One of them, tall and muscular, stepped forward. His face was marked with old scars, his eyes sharp like a hawk. General Nyoka. He was a man feared even by kings. But when he looked down at Naria, something shifted in his gaze. "She's not dying today," he said. His voice was rough but sure. He scooped her up with one arm and walked back to the camp. No one questioned him. In the desert stronghold of the Zamora exiles, Naria was nursed back to life. Slowly, she began to eat again, speak again, move again. But something had changed. She was no longer a child searching for her father. That part of her had burned away under the sun. Now she was a survivor, silent, sharp, and watching. Nyoka saw it. He saw the fire, and he trained her himself. Day after day, she was pushed harder than the men. She ran barefoot across burning sand. She lifted stones twice her size. She fought with wooden blades until her arms bled. She learned the secrets of desert warfare, how to use the heat as a weapon, how to vanish into dust storms, and how to fight with the fire blade, Zamora's deadliest style. She grew fast, stronger than any girl her age, faster than the men she trained with. She didn't talk much, but her eyes said everything. The men started whispering. They called her the Silent Storm. Even Nyoka watched her with respect. One night, after she had beaten 3 men in a training match, a warrior asked her, "Why do you fight so hard? Why never rest?" She wiped the sweat from her face and stared into the flames of the fire pit. Her voice was calm but firm. "Because one day, I will return to the place I was left to die." No one asked again. From that day, her name was written on every wall in that camp. Not as a child, not as a girl, but as a warrior in the making, a storm building strength, a fire learning how to burn without smoke. And she would not stop. Because her story was never about survival. It was about becoming the very thing her enemies feared. And she was almost ready. On the night of her 18th birthday, the sky above the ruined land of Zamora cracked with thunder. Wind howled through the broken towers where kings once ruled. Firelight flickered across Naria's face as she stood in the center of the ancient courtyard, surrounded by warriors who had become her family, orphans, exiles, broken people, just like her. Each one carried scars not just on their bodies, but deep within their hearts. And they all looked to her. Naria stepped forward. Her long braid was tied with leather, her hands steady. In one hand, a ceremonial blade. In the other, a small bowl. She cut across her palm, letting the blood drip into the bowl. The flames reflected in her eyes, but her voice was stronger than any storm. "I swear," she said, "to protect the abandoned, to strike down tyrants, to never forget." Her voice rang through the night, clear and fierce. One by one, the warriors stepped forward. Some were boys no older than 15. Others were women who had lost their homes, their names, their peace. Each one cut their palm and added their blood to the bowl. No one hesitated. They weren't an army dressed in gold. They wore no polished armor, no shining medals, just rough clothes, handmade weapons, and fire in their hearts. But what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in loyalty. These were not people chasing fame. They didn't dream of riches or power. They had seen too much pain for that. What they wanted was something different, something deeper, justice. They wanted to find the men who had burned their homes. They wanted to face the chiefs who had sold them. They wanted to destroy the system that had crushed them. And they would follow Naria, because she didn't speak like a queen. She spoke like one of them. Naria gave them direction. She trained them in secret. Desert ambushes, silent kills, unity in chaos. They moved like wind through the plains, unseen and unstoppable. Every village they passed through whispered about them, the Fireborn, the forgotten army. But to Naria, they were simply her people. Every night, she reminded them why they fought, not for land, not for crowns, but for every child left behind, for every mother who died begging for justice, for every soul that had been thrown away like trash. Their cause was not revenge, it was balance. As the stars moved above Zamora's broken skyline, Naria stood tall beside the ancient throne where her bloodline once sat, but she didn't claim it, not yet. She turned to her warriors. "We don't need titles, we need change." They nodded in silence. No cheering, no celebration, just the weight of a promise made in blood and pain. The fire cracked louder, and in that moment, the army of the abandoned was born, not with war cries, but with a quiet, powerful oath that would shake kingdoms. They moved without sound, striking like wind and disappearing like smoke. In the darkest hours of night, villages woke to find the banners of cruel chiefs burned to ashes. Slave camps found their gates broken, their masters bound, and the children freed. Underground gold mines where little boys once cried in silence now echoed with cheers. Naria and her army didn't leave names or take credit. They came, they struck, and they vanished. People began to whisper, first in fear, then in awe. "There's a ghost among them," some said. "A woman. Her eyes burn like fire. They call her the Mask of Zamora." Naria wore a cloth mask made of desert linen, stained with the red clay of her homeland. No one outside her army had seen her face in years. It wasn't pride. It wasn't fear. It was purpose. She didn't want to be worshipped like a queen or praised like a hero. She was a symbol of pain, of power, of those who were once forgotten. In the east, they freed villages ruled by chiefs who sold their people for diamonds. In the west, they stormed salt mines where women were held like animals. And every time, they left behind a mark, 3 lines drawn in ash, one for the past, one for the pain, and one for the future. Her warriors followed her without question. They believed in what she stood for. Some had seen their brothers die in chains. Others had lost sisters to greedy kings. With Naria, they found more than freedom. They found justice. She never gave long speeches. Her orders were short, clear, sharp. Strike at dawn. No blood of the innocent. Free first, burn later. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Even General Nyoka, now her second in command, took orders from her like a student. The people, farmers, widows, lost children, began to believe in something again. When Naria passed through a rescued village, she didn't demand praise. But the villagers would kneel anyway. Some kissed the ground she walked on, not because of fear, but because of hope. She had become more than a warrior. She was a legend growing faster than any fire. And yet, she stayed quiet. No throne, no name, just the mask. The rich chiefs sent spies. Some tried to bribe her. Others tried to trap her. None returned. Her army had eyes in every corner, ears in every market. They lived among the people, protected them, and listened. While kings played games in their palaces, Naria was building a new kind of power, one born from trust, not gold. Every village they freed added to their strength, not just in numbers, but in loyalty. People gave food without being asked, gave shelter without fear, and the name Mask of Zimora spread across the land, carried by wind, ink, and song. She didn't speak of revenge, she didn't seek a crown, but the world was watching, and those in power were starting to tremble. Naria stood still at the edge of Quaronda, her feet sinking into the same red soil where she had once been left to die. The wind carried the scent of dust and old memories. Before her rose the mountain where her father had abandoned her. That image, his back turning, her small hand clutching the clay doll, flashed before her eyes. But she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She whispered, "We're not here to burn it all," just to remind them who they forgot. Behind her, 300 warriors stood ready. No drums, no noise, just silence. They wore no armor, only cloth marked by the same black and red colors as their flag. Black for the pain they carried, red for the blood they had shed. Their bodies were covered in scars, but their eyes were full of fire. These weren't ordinary fighters. These were survivors, broken once, now unshakable. They moved through Quaronda without chaos. No one was harmed, no homes destroyed. But scrolls were left at every doorstep, every market stall, every chief's hall. The scrolls held a simple message, written in bold strokes. Your children will never be abandoned again. The throne will fall. The people of Quaronda read the words in silence, their hands trembling. Many remembered Naria's name. Others had heard whispers of the Mask of Zimora, but none had connected the ghost warrior to the baby left under a tree. Now, it was clear. The child they had ignored had returned, not in chains, not begging, but with an army. Fear spread among the chiefs. The elders gathered in hidden chambers. They sent messengers to Chief Bakaru, now old and frail, but still holding power. Your daughter lives, they told him. She has returned, and she is not alone. Bakaru refused to believe it at first. He thought the girl would have died within hours. He had never spoken of what he did, never admitted his crime. Now, his past had come back to walk on 2 feet, with fire in her eyes and a voice louder than a storm. Naria and her army did not storm the palace. Not yet. They simply walked through villages, helping the poor, healing the wounded, and reminding the people that they were not forgotten. Where once she had cried for help, and no one came, now others called her name with hope in their voices. Naria, Mask of Zimora, the lost daughter. She made no threats. She gave no speeches. Her presence alone was a warning, a reminder that what is buried does not always stay buried, that children left in the wild do not always die. Sometimes they grow stronger than kings. And so, Quaronda held its breath. The streets were quiet, but every heart beat faster. The throne sat high on the hill, untouched, for now, but the people knew. The ground was shifting, and something unstoppable had returned. The girl left to jackals was back, and this time she had come with a purpose. Chief Bakaru sat in his throne room, his fingers gripping the carved arms of the chair that had ruled Quaronda for decades. His breath was shallow, his eyes bloodshot. The news had arrived like thunder. Naria was alive, not just alive, but marching through villages with an army of warriors loyal to her cause. His daughter, the child he left to die. Now the people whispered her name with reverence, not sorrow. The throne beneath him suddenly felt colder, shakier. "She is alive!" Bakaru hissed, slamming his fist on the stone table. The priests flinched. One of them stepped forward, older than the rest, with white paint across his forehead. He spoke softly, but his words cut deeper than any blade. You created your own storm, chief. Now it rides toward you, not to knock, but to break your gates. Bakaru's pride turned to panic. He called for more soldiers, demanded higher taxes from already starving villages, and ordered smiths to forge new weapons. The people grumbled, but none dared protest. Fear was thick in the air, not from an outside enemy, but from their own palace. Then, in desperation, Bakaru summoned his son, Prince Karimo. Younger than Naria, raised in luxury, and shadowed by guilt he didn't fully understand. Bakaru handed him a sword and a command. Find her, stop her, remind her who wears the crown. Karimo left with 50 men. He returned 3 days later, beaten, tied, dropped like a warning at the palace gates. On his chest hung a wooden sign, burned with words for all to see. I am not my sister's enemy. Bakaru's face went pale. He didn't move as the guards carefully untied the prince and helped him stand. Karimo's face was bruised, but his eyes burned not with shame, but clarity. Father, he said through a bloodied lip, you told me she was lost, but she found something we never had. Truth. Bakaru turned away. He couldn't look his son in the eyes. Whispers began rising like smoke through the palace halls. The people were watching. The soldiers were listening. Even the wind seemed to carry Naria's name. The throne no longer felt like power. It felt like punishment. Every crack in the palace walls, every whisper in the corridors, every scroll posted in town squares, they all pointed to one truth. The kingdom was shifting, not with fire or swords, but with the return of the one he cast away. Chief Bakaru had always believed in control, in fear, in prophecies, but he never believed that the child he abandoned would become the woman who would rise beyond him. Now, as he sat alone in his great hall, that prophecy whispered through the silence. She will return with fire in her eye and take your throne by storm. And now, the storm had a name, Naria. The night was still, heavy with silence. Not even the guards dared to speak. Then, without warning, the palace gates exploded open, their iron hinges screaming as a black wave of warriors poured through. Torches blazed in the dark, casting long shadows on the stone walls. At the front of them walked a figure cloaked in darkness, but as she entered the courtyard, she pulled down her mask. Naria. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned like wildfire. Her boots echoed against the marble floor as she walked alone toward the great hall. Behind her, her army waited, silent, disciplined, unshaken. Inside the hall, Chief Bakaru sat frozen. The guards didn't move. No one could speak. The silence between father and daughter was louder than war drums. She stood at the foot of the throne, close enough for him to see the cold steel in her gaze. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then, at last, he whispered, You. Naria didn't reply. She slowly reached into a leather pouch tied to her waist and pulled out something small, old, cracked, and fragile. A clay doll, the same one her small hand had clutched the day he left her in the forest. She looked at it for a long moment, then locked eyes with him. You left me to die. Bakaru rose from his throne, stumbling down the steps like a man chasing ghosts. Naria, I had to. The prophecy. His voice cracked with guilt, fear, and the weight of 11 years of silence. Before he could finish, she threw the doll at his feet. It shattered into pieces, the sound sharp like thunder in the stillness. I am not your prophecy, she said, voice steady, words like blades. I am your consequence. Bakaru looked at the broken doll on the floor. Around them, the guards didn't raise their weapons. The priests didn't chant. Even the wind held its breath. Naria didn't come to beg. She didn't come for mercy. She came to remind him of the truth he had buried with lies and fear. Her army didn't invade. They simply stood witness to what justice looked like when it finally arrived. He sank to his knees, trembling. But Naria didn't touch him. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shook the throne more than any sword could. Behind her, the people of Quaronda began to gather outside the gates. Farmers, elders, children. Some of them held their own scars, their own stories of betrayal. They had read her scrolls. They had seen the change, and now they saw her, the forgotten daughter who came back not with hate, but with purpose. The palace that once ruled with fear now echoed with a new power, the power of truth. And as Naria stood tall, fire in her eyes, she wasn't just a daughter facing her father. She was the storm he tried to silence, and she had returned. The sun had not yet risen, but the people of Quaronda were already awake. From every corner of the kingdom they stepped into the streets. Farmers with calloused hands, traders with worn sandals, widows with tired eyes, children without names. They all came, drawn by one name, Naria. The throne had ruled them with iron and fear for too long. Chief Bakaru's taxes had left them hungry. His silence had left them hopeless. His rule had turned the strong into shadows. But now, something had changed. Word had spread like wildfire. Naria had returned. The girl who was left to die was alive, and she was standing. No one gave orders. No one rang a bell, yet thousands gathered. They didn't carry weapons. They carried the weight of pain. They raised their fists high, painted black with a red streak down the middle, the symbol of Zimora, the forgotten kingdom. The symbol Naria had turned into a movement. The old men shook their heads in disbelief. She did what no one else could. The women whispered, "She fights for those we buried." Children stood on rooftops, shouting, "Naria! Naria!" Even the guards at the palace gates, armed in gold and trained for war, looked at the crowd and hesitated. These were not rebels. They were their mothers, their neighbors, their own children. Slowly, one by one, the guards lowered their spears. Inside the palace, Bakaru stared from the balcony, his face pale. His soldiers stood motionless behind him, unsure where their loyalty now belonged. For the first time in years, he saw something stronger than his rule, hope. Naria stepped forward, not dressed like a queen, not surrounded by gold, but wrapped in the simple cloth of a warrior. Her voice was steady, but it didn't need to be loud. The people listened because they knew her story. They had lived pieces of it themselves. "I didn't come to take power," she said. "I came to return it to the people." There was no vote, no ceremony, but the people knew what they wanted. They raised their fists again, this time higher. The name echoed from mountain to market. Naria! She didn't sit on the throne. She stood with them. And that day, Quaronda changed forever, not because a crown was passed, but because the people remembered their voice. And they chose, not out of fear, but out of faith. Chief Bakaru, once the most feared man in Quaronda, tried to escape under the cover of night. Wrapped in a hooded cloak, he crept through secret paths behind the palace, hoping to reach the southern gates before anyone noticed. But he wasn't fast enough. The same streets he ruled now turned against him. A group of barefoot boys spotted him. They were children he had once brushed aside, boys who had slept on dusty roads while he feasted in gold halls. They remembered his face well. Without hesitation, they grabbed him. He shouted, begged, tried to bribe them with empty promises. But the boys didn't listen. They had seen too much. They dragged him through the streets, past homes he had broken, past people he had once ruled. Word spread fast. Crowds formed, growing bigger with every step. The same people who once bowed to him now stared at him in silence. In the palace courtyard, they threw him to the ground. The people closed in from all sides, surrounding the man who once sat high above them. His robes were torn. His pride was gone. And in the center of the circle stood Naria. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her hand. She simply looked at him, her face calm but firm. Bakaru met her eyes, and for the first time, he looked small, not because of his age or the fall of his crown, but because he was stripped of the power he once used to control others. He tried to speak, but Naria raised a hand, not to strike, but to silence. "I will not stain my hands with his blood," she said, her voice steady. "He will not escape the judgment of those he hurt." And then she turned to the crowd, to the women who had lost husbands to his greed, to the old men who were forced to sell their land, to the children who had never known kindness under his rule. She handed him over to them, not to kill, but to decide. They did not raise weapons. They raised memories, and in one voice, they spoke. Let him walk alone. No gold, no food, no guards. Let him feel what we felt, forgotten. They gave him nothing but a walking stick and the clothes he wore. Then they opened the southern gate, the same one he had tried to flee through in secret. Now, he had to walk through it with every eye watching. No one cheered, no one clapped, just silence. Bakaru stepped outside the gate, the weight of his shame heavier than any chain. He turned once, hoping someone would call him back. No one did. He walked into the wilderness alone, with only the sound of his footsteps and the echo of what he had lost. That day, justice did not come through fire or sword. It came through truth, memory, and unity. And for Bakaru, the greatest punishment wasn't death. It was exile, with nothing but the shame of being forgotten by the people he once ruled. The sky blazed with the deep red of sunset, as Naria stood where her father once ruled from a throne soaked in betrayal and pain. The air was thick with anticipation, but she did not move to claim the seat that once symbolized power in Quaronda. Instead, with a fierce look in her eyes, she took a heavy stone hammer and smashed it to pieces. The wood splintered, the gold cracked. The throne was broken forever. She wanted everyone to see that the old way was dead. No more kings who betrayed their own blood. No more rulers who turned a deaf ear to the cries of their people. Naria turned from the ruins of the throne and looked out over the gathered crowd, warriors, villagers, children, and elders, all waiting for what came next. She raised her voice, strong and clear. This kingdom will not be ruled by one, but by many, by the voices of those who were silenced for too long. She formed a new council, unlike anything Quaronda had ever seen. It was made up of women, warriors who had fought alongside her, and orphans who once had no voice, but now held power. These were the people who understood pain, sacrifice, and strength. Together, they promised to lead with justice, compassion, and courage. Naria did not want to be a queen who sat comfortably on a throne. She wanted to be a war queen, a leader who fights alongside her people, who protects them with every breath. She spent her days listening to the farmers struggling to harvest, the traders seeking fairness, and the children dreaming of a future without fear. Every decision was for the people who had waited so long for hope. Above the gates of the palace, new words were carved into stone, bold and clear for all to see. No child left behind, not in this kingdom, not again. It was a promise carved deep into the heart of Quaronda, a vow that no child would ever be abandoned or forgotten like she once was. The people began to believe in this new Quaronda. It was a place where justice lived, where strength was shared, and where every voice mattered. Naria, once left to die, had returned not as a broken girl, but as a queen of the ashes, a symbol of rebirth and unstoppable power. Her story spread far beyond the borders, inspiring those who had been silenced to stand up and demand change. No more shadows, no more fear. The War Queen had risen, and with her, a new dawn for Quaronda. The past was gone, replaced by a future where the forgotten were heard, and the kingdom belonged to all. If Naria's story touched your heart, remember, no one should ever be left behind or forgotten. Her journey from betrayal and abandonment to rising as a fierce leader shows us the power of courage, justice, and never giving up. We all have a Naria inside us, the strength to stand up against wrongs and fight for what is right. Let this story remind you to look out for those who feel invisible, to speak for the voiceless, and to believe that even the deepest wounds can heal into unbreakable power. Change starts with one voice, one act of bravery, one decision to rise. If you believe in standing for justice and lifting others up, please like this video to show your support. Share it with your friends and family so Naria's message of hope and strength reaches more hearts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire and move you. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Together, we can make sure no one is left behind. Not in stories, not in life. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Let's keep the fire of courage alive. Stay strong, stay kind, and see you in the next story.